Today we're going to talk about three men who got out of a boat. So I've been told that it looks like I'm about to fall in when I'm up here. If I do, it's just a sermon illustration. But today we will discuss three men who got out of a boat or were thrown out of a boat. The first one, as you may guess, is Jonah. If you want to turn there, our starting and opening scripture is the first chapter of Jonah. We'll start Jonah 1 in verse 1. Now when the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them. So to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was threatening to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each called out to his own god, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had lain down, and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, sleeper? Arise and call on your God. Perhaps the God will have a thought to us, that we may not perish. And they said to one another, Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account the evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And they said to him, Tell us on whose account the evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? And where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you? So he said to them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, Yahweh, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, What is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, What shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. And he said to them, Pick me up and hurl me into the sea, then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that the great tempest had come upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they cried out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish from this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as is pleasing to you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. As is common to all of the stories that we will read this morning and look at, there's the storm that's on the sea. Not only is there a storm that's on the sea, it's not one of those beautiful afternoon showers that cools off the heat of the day. It's not one of those light drizzles where the fog comes up and everything is all mysterious and pretty. This is a storm that is of such great intensity that people who make their living by being on the water are afraid of the water. Look down. It's the mariners, the seafaring men, verse 13, that are afraid of the tempestuous waters. Great word. Love to repeat it. Had to look it up. Means what you think it means. Really testy and a large storm. The mariners are saved whenever they do what Jonah says and throw him out of the boat. So look down, it's verses 15 and 16. So they picked up Jonah, they chucked him out, and the sea quieted down. Now imagine this scene. You're one of the mariners. Sorry for you, you don't know God yet. You throw a man out of the boat and the previously intensely swelling seas have stopped. Where's the man that you threw in? He's right over there, floating away from the boat. It only says later that God sent a great fish or a whale. It doesn't say whale, but that's what we picture it as. That he sent a fish whose mouth and belly were large enough to swallow a man whole and not to chew on him. There's something else that I want to look at and help us to define as we move through all of our studies. What do you think of when you hear the word down? It's a direction. You may think of your feet or your freshly painted toenails. You may think of heading north to Corbin and going down from the mountain. Down is used in Jonah only in a negative sense in the book of Jonah. It's used in verse 3, verse 5, 11, 12, chapter 2, verse 6, chapter 4, verse 8. I'll give you that list later if you'd like. But whenever we say something is going down according to the Bible, it's going to be a negative thing. It's going to be a bad thing. Why is Jonah going down? He's running from the Lord, and running from the Lord means you have to go down. Why? Because he is the Lord on high. So as we read through the further studies, look at the difference in being where someone is and going down. So Jonah goes down. We'll bring him up later. The next one we'll look at is Peter. If you are so inclined, turn to Matthew chapter 14. And we'll start in verse 22. Matthew 14:22. Immediately he is Jesus, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. When he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when he got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When he had crossed over, he came to the land of Gennesaret. Peter's in a storm. The apostles are afraid. This storm is listed in 3 different accounts: Matthew, Mark, and John. In Mark, we're told that they're making painful headway. It's a tempestuous storm, without it actually being listed as a tempestuous storm. People, again, that make their money from being on the water are afraid of the water. Except for Peter. He gets out. Peter makes this story into something amazing and wonderful. And instead of this story being amazing and wonderful, that this man of faith got out of the boat, he got out of the boat and he walked to Jesus. And and he embraced Jesus, and they kissed, and they got into the boat, and immediately they were on the other side. But that's not how the story reads. It doesn't read as someone who you don't know, some great faithful individual. It reads like me. That as soon as I got out of the boat, because I'm headstrong and I'm too smart for my own good, and I have to learn things by experience. How hard do I have to hit my hand with a hammer before it hurts real bad? I have to learn by experience. Peter looks like maybe any one of us. That he gets out of the boat because he's got faith in God. He's got faith that the man that is on the water and walking on the water is the Son of God. And so he gets out of the boat. The problem is immediately something springs up, scares the fool out of him. He looks down, realizes that people don't walk on water. And he sinks. That's so much more relatable. That's so much more maybe me or you. I'm going to jump out of the boat because I want to be where Jesus is. I'm going to jump out of the boat and I'll make it a good ways. And then I'll figure out I'm not as perfect as you may think. That I can't put up with as much temptation as I may think. And Peter goes down like Jonah. Peter goes away from the presence of his Lord down into the water. And in that story, in this event that happens, he's rescued by a loving Savior who reaches out his hand, not because Peter deserved to be pulled up out of the water. He probably should have been pushed further down. If it was me, that would have been the case. But the Savior comes to him and saves him because he's not going to be able to save himself. Not only does he save him, but he quiets the sea, like happened previously in Jonah. Like happened previously in Jonah, there is a vessel made available to him to get him to where he needs to be, to the shore. And immediately they end up on the, and when they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. Neither of these men have the ability to save themselves. If you're still in Jonah, it's verse 5. If you are in Matthew, it's verse 30. They cannot save themselves. They are going down. Both of them are sinking. Adding back to Peter's story, Jonah's, there are men who are on the vessel. They're praying out to all of their various gods. Maybe they're praying out to the sea god that they claim to quiet the sea. Maybe they cry out to the land god to bring the land closer to them. Maybe they cry out to something else. It doesn't matter. No matter what god they cry out to, it doesn't matter. Nothing changes. Nothing happens. There is no help. There's no cessation of tempestuousness. That's probably the biggest SAT word you've gotten from me all year. It doesn't stop. It's only with the calling out to the true God that something happens. Flip over to Jonah chapter 2. Scan it real quick. It's a prayer. It's Jonah's prayer to God that he makes from apparently inside the belly of this great fish. That's gross. It's only when Peter cries out, Lord, save me. Second thing that they have in common is that neither of these men focused on the goals that they had before them that God had given to them. Jonah is supposed to go northeast. Instead, he goes west. He's trying to go to Tarshish. Quick geography quiz. Where's Tarshish? It's in Spain. He's leaving the Palestinian coast to sail west to Spain. instead of going east. Instead of focusing on Jesus, who's standing on the water, apparently doing it well enough to be way out from land. Remember, that's where the boat is by the time Jesus finishes praying on the mountain. That the boat is a far ways from land. And yet Jesus comes to them walking on the water. And instead of focusing on Jesus, once Peter jumps out and is committed to this interaction, instead of focusing on the man who's made it this whole way, who's been doing it right and still does it right, Peter looks over to his side, to the wind and the waves, and that's when he sinks. It's when they stop looking at their godly goal that both of these men get in trouble. The last commonality they have is why. Why did Jonah get out of the boat? Why did Peter? I would say to you that Jonah is giving up. I'm not going to... There are some that think that Jonah's getting up in a sacrificial manner. He's saying, sacrifice me so that it's for the good of the mariners. That doesn't make much sense in any context of this story. I think Jonah's giving up. Just end my life. Throw me out. It's only me that God's after. If you'll throw me out, I'll meet him. And I've already heard the story of Job, of how I need a mediator between myself and God, and I'll do that. I'll talk to God on my own behalf. I think that's what Jonah's doing. Why did Peter get out of the boat? Jesus, in one of the accounts, it says Jesus meant to pass by them. That not only were they making painful headway in a boat, the appropriate vessel for ocean going, or actually Sea of Galilee going, but he's going to pass by him. He's going to get there first. And Peter says, command me to get out of the boat, and I will. Why are you getting out of the boat? I think it's because Peter wanted to get closer to his Lord. I think Peter does have an honest to goodness goal here. He wants to get closer to Jesus. Don't these stories start to sound more and more like the parable of the sower? There was one prophet, and his kernel of seed landed on the solid ground, on the pathway, and the birds of the air came and devoured it. There's Jonah. That Peter was so headstrong, he says, Lord, command me to come to you. And Peter gets out of the boat, and it sounds like the seed that fell in the rocky places that had no root, but it sprang up really big. And when the sun scorched it, because it had no root, because of things in the earth, it just faded away. And that's Peter. It sounds like Peter. At this point, I'm wondering how many of you are going, who's the third guy? Acts chapter 27. Acts chapter 27, where we will pick up in verse 13. We will find that Paul has been imprisoned for a while now, and that he's going to be sent to Rome. Damon, come here, please. Will you separate these two pages? Thank you. I needed that one though. Thank you. Just right there. Acts chapter 27, verse 13. Paul is already on the way to Rome. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the Northeastern struck from the land. And when the ship was caught, it could not face the wind. We gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing they would run aground along on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were so violently storm-tossed, and they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now verse 22, Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God granted you all, and therefore God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have told you. But we must run aground on some island." When the 14th night had come, as they were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. They took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. And a little further they took a sounding and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they lay down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ship's ropes and let the boat... Verse 32, Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. As it was about to dawn, Paul urged them to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day, and you have continued in suspense without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, gave thanks to God in the presence of all. He broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Paul's scenario reads so much differently than both Jonah's and Peter's. Everything Paul does is a move to go closer to God. It's the opposite of Jonah. They mentioned in the story is that the sailors threw out the tackle with their own hands. This is the ability to make the ship do things that the ship does. That means the ship won't be able to do those things because it doesn't have the tackle to do it. They are being less able to save themselves. They already count the entire ship's money as not there. The crops that they're supposed to sell, they're throwing it away to lighten the ship. They've already said, anything for me to be saved. Anything for me to get out of this situation, this scenario. Look at verse 17. After hoisting it up, they would run aground on after hoisting it up, they used the supports. They used supports to undergird the ship. I researched this in some great detail a couple of years back. They're taking the ropes. You know, in the movies, there's all kinds of extra rope in a boat. They're taking the extra ropes and they're tying it underneath the boat. You go to the bow, and you hold that piece of rope over there on the port, and I'll hold the piece of rope over here on the starboard, and we'll slowly lower it, and we'll go underneath the ship with it. And when we get to the spot in the middle of the ship, we'll take your end and my end, and we will tie them together. We will literally tie the boat together. This isn't done. All this does is slow you down and keep the ship together, but it slows you down. Whatever it takes to stay alive. Whatever it takes to stay alive. It doesn't matter what our prosperity is. Remember, we're the mariner in the scenario. It doesn't matter what our prosperity is. We threw all that overboard. We're going to have to pay the bill for that grain. We're not going to make any money. We haven't eaten in 2 weeks. What little they do have left, they eat, and then they throw the rest out. Because that guy said we'll reach land. That guy promised that out of the 276 persons, not a hair, was it verse 34? For it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of the 276 persons. That in itself is a miracle. Some of you lose hair every time you get in the pool. Amen. I recruited him for that. Check's in the mail, bro. Not a hair is gone. And this isn't just some storm. This is a Euroclydon. It's even, if you have the Old King James, read it. It's a really cool looking word. If you have the Old American Standard, it's even different word. They don't even know what this word means. It's not a word that you can translate into English. So the King James gives us the best idea of what it would sound like in the original Greek. The storm itself is like a hurricane, or a blizzard, or a typhoon, something like that. It's a big bad storm that would get a name. The mariners are scared. They're trying to leave the ship. Do you see that? They have already said, hey, we're going to lower some anchors down from the bow. We're really going to anchor this ship down. First of all, that's a dumb idea. That's not what you've got the stern anchored down already. The mariners are afraid of the water. They want to be saved. All hope is abandoned. So look at verse 39. What do they see? There is a beach ahead, a sweet shore that they are longing to get to. Damon, how many songs can you think of with the idea of a shore? On Jordan's stormy banks. You could have led hundreds of them. Down by the riverside, there's a sweet beach, something that gives life right up ahead of them. In verses 40 and 41, they forsake the boat. In verses 42 and 43, we see that no matter what happens, man cannot stop salvation. Verse 42, the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners lest they should swim away and escape. Paul's one of those prisoners. The man who's instructed them on how to be saved in the scenario, how to keep their life. And they're going to kill him so he doesn't escape. It's actually a very intelligent plan when you take all faith, religiosity out of it. Man cannot stop salvation. Look at verse 43. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first to make it to land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought to safety to land. You think they were scared? The mariners have already tried to escape whatever it is that's going on. The ship that you were just on for the past month-ish is now breaking up on the rocks. You haven't quite made it to land yet. All you have is the promise of some prisoner that you'll make it. Forsake the boat is the answer that Paul gives. You cannot be saved by any product of man. Noah built an ark, yes. And God said, I'll make a covenant with the entire world. I'll never do this again. You want to be saved in the future, you're going to need to follow one man. A man who has been made into a prisoner. Just like that guy. You need to listen to the words of a prisoner so that you can escape the boat you're in that is going to be broken up, that is going to crash along the reef, that will not make it to that sweet, sweet shore. You need to forsake the boat. You're not going to make it without the prisoner. If you want to make it to that blissful shore, you need to get out of the boat. The whole world is in the same boat, and that boat is going nowhere. It's crashing on the rocks. It's breaking up upon the reef. The boat that the whole world is in is being destroyed. And your only chance is to listen to the prisoner. The prisoner says, listen to me. You need to get out of that boat. You need to leave the world of sin behind. You need to leave sin behind. It will not save you. You need to leave that behind, and you need to swim to shore. You need to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Do the best you can, but you've got to get out of that boat. That boat's going nowhere. Why did Paul get out of the boat? He got out of the boat because he had faith in God. God had told him to get out of the boat. He kept his eyes on the prize. He swam all the way to the beach. He got bit by a snake. That's a different story. If you want to make it to that sweet, blissful shore, you got to get out of the boat. No strength of man can save you. And no strength of man can stop you from being saved, except yourself. Nobody's going to keep you on that boat so that you can be destroyed. The mariners, boat cut away right out from under them. The soldiers, they're stopped by their leader and not allowed to kill the prisoner. Nothing can stop the plan of God. If you want to be saved, nothing will stop that. Amen. But the boat's breaking up. You got nowhere else to go. Will you get out of the boat and make it to the shore? Now, if we're using our parable of the sower, this is going to be the seed that was planted and gave fruit. God is going to save those who get out of the boat, follow his plan. Don't take our eyes off of our goal like Peter did. Don't give up like Jonah did. God isn't in the boat.